Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Simon Phipps joins me. We're going to be talking about Chomper, a great way to whitelist or blacklist various websites so you don't get too distracted. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Simon Phipps. Episode 481, recorded April 25th, 2018. Chomper. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully so that you can be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. Get started at rocketmortgage.com/floss. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I'm your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects you may be using every day and not aware of it, projects you might want to play with right after this show. I think today's going to be one of those. Joining me once again is my lovely and talented co-host, Simon Phipps. Simon, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Randall. And I've actually made it up here to Petaluma to be here in person in the wonderful East Side studio, which I've never been in before. And I even have an audience with me today of the winners of a hackathon in Bolzano in Italy,
awesome,
who are all on a tour of Silicon Valley. So they're all over there, and they're Python geeks. So they're very excited about this project.
Oh, that ought to be really cool then. And I'm speaking once again from my home in Beaverton, Oregon. Just flew back in last night, so my arm's a little tired. So it's going to be a little crazy show for that. I was going to say, you've actually now beaten me into the new studio. I haven't been there yet. So I've been to the original cottage, and I've been to the brick house, but I haven't been to the new East Side studio. So someday I'm going to have to figure out a time that I can come up there and see what all the new digs looks like. But that's not happening today. Instead, today we have a show. We're bringing on a show about Chomper. Let me find my notes about it here. Oops, scroll. I should have it scroll to the right place before I start the show. That would be good. So Chomper is described by its creator, Aniket Panjwani, who we're bringing on in a few minutes, as an internet blocking program that he's developed for Linux. You define a whitelist or blacklist of websites, and Chomper will block you from visiting non-whitelisted or blacklisted websites for the amount of time you specify. So I'm self-diagnosed ADHD, so I go crazy sometimes when I'm on the net. I just start going off and saying, I wonder what's happening on Facebook right now, or I wonder what's happening on my my blog entry that I just made or whatever, right? So I am probably the exact audience for this particular project, and I bet Aniket was also the exact audience for doing this because he's scratching his own itch, I'm sure, on this one. But I'm also very likely never to use it. Just because I am like that. I really don't want to be blocked from anywhere I want to go. So, Simon, what's your take on this so far?
Yeah, it's an interesting project that strikes me that it needs a good deal of self-control and self-knowledge to be able to run it, as well as a resistance to the frustration of not being able to get rid of that thought that's in your head that has got in the way of you doing your work. So I'm pretty skeptical. I have a hunch that anything that I'm able to install to stop me getting on the internet, I'm also well able to remove when I'm in the middle of my work to go and get a bit of distraction. So I'll be kind of interested to find out what Aniket has done to stop me securing my own curiosity when I get bored.
And I'm also curious. I mean, it's like I'm trying to think how I would actually set up either a whitelist or a blacklist, because for me, it'd be like 80% of the net would have to be blacklisted if I was going to do that. And for whitelisting, if it's trying to get my work done, you know, I bounce around all the time in Google to get questions answered, things like that. So I'm not sure exactly how effective a whitelist or a blacklist would be for me. So I'll be curious to see what Aniket's experience is with this and being able to generate that. Anything more before we get started with the show?
No, you know, my arms are pretty tired as well because I flew over from London on Monday. And so we've all been up since like 5 o'clock in the morning when we all woke up thinking it was the middle of the day.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've had days like that. And I get to do one of those. I'm flying to Europe in, I think, about 8 weeks, going to Amsterdam for a couple days, and then off on a 15-day cruise. And
it's tough.
Back in Amsterdam for a night. Yeah, I know. Life
that
is
job
tough.
you
It's
have there
tough.
is so rough on you.
It is, going on 3 or 4 cruises a year and calling it work has just been pretty amazing. Yeah. So at least that's what I tell the IRS. It's all work. Okay. Anyway, but before we do that, before we bring on our guest, Annika, we do have a very important message, because this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. The mortgage experience wasn't keeping up with the times. It was dated, and it needed a client-focused technological revolution. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. Rocket Mortgage gives you the confidence you need when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. It's simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. It's convenient. Their trusted partners allow you to share your financial information with Rocket Mortgage at a touch of a button. It's powerful. Whether you're looking to buy your first home or your 10th, Rocket Mortgage is able to perform thousands of calculations in seconds. Based on your income, assets, and credit, Rocket Mortgage can analyze all the home loan options for which you qualify and find the one that's just right for you. Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Apply simply, understand fully, mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/floss. That's rocketmortgage.com/FLOSS. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030. And we thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support of Floss Weekly. Well, let's go ahead and bring on our guest. Annika, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in Evanston, Illinois. I'm a PhD student in economics at Northwestern University, which is right around here.
So give us the 30,000-foot view. If I'm reaching for Chomper, what am I trying to solve?
So Chomper is, as you described aptly, is an internet blocker for Linux. So you can define a file which has a set of websites which you either want to whitelist or blacklist. And then at the command line, you just enter in a simple command, Chomper, the name of your rule. So say I'm doing coding, I say Chomper, coding, and then under my coding profile, I'll have written down, say, Stack Overflow, GitHub, and maybe Wikipedia if I need to use that. And then I'll define a set amount of time for which I want these websites other than those ones to be blocked. So how it sort of works fundamentally in terms of programming architecture is that when you call Chomper, it will generate a transparent proxy. It will route all traffic through this computer, through your computer, through this proxy, which is on your own computer. And then the proxy will be able to observe all traffic at the URL level and be able to allow or deny web traffic based off the URL.
And actually, we have a great question already from the audience, from our online audience. Emily Strange asks, isn't this just some sort of advanced version of the host file? And I already know the answer to that, but why don't you go ahead and describe the answer?
Yeah, so before, I've had the idea of creating Chomper for about a year, but I had no idea how to make it. Because what I did before is I had a different program, which I would call pre-commit. And this program was just a simple Python script, which would modify the host file. So the host file allows you to circumvent your ISP's domain name server lookup. And so you're able to redirect, say, Facebook to 0.0.0.0, which will not resolve and effectively blocks that website. But what you can't do with a host file is you can't set a set of websites to allow, and then you can't create a whitelist with the host file. And you also can't block websites at the level of a URL. So a good example here is I want to be able to, say, purchase things on Amazon.com, but I don't want to be able to watch videos on Amazon.com. So since all videos on Amazon.com have a standard URL structure, you could designate all of those as being blocked and allow everything else. And that could be really useful in some situations.
So you created this out of your own, scratching your own itch. How effective do you think it's been to be able to have this technology available to you?
So it's not a panacea. Like if you are deeply depressed, hate your life, and can't get yourself to work, having Chomper on hand will not like suddenly get you to work. But what it is useful for a large set of people is that, we kind of don't have total control over ourselves sometimes in how we interact with certain internet websites. And that's something I notice about myself. Like, I want to take a break, I go to Reddit, and I'm spending a lot more time there than I ever wanted to. So I find it quite useful, especially since when I'm working on my dissertation, I end up having to do a lot of work that's not very fun, that is quite boring, and I have a very limited set of websites that I actually need to access, and I just need to buckle down and do that work. So if I set Chomper on for, say, the next 30 or 45 minutes, the idea is to have a program that creates an environment such that I have no option to do anything but work. And I found it to be quite useful for that purpose.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you're eating your own dog food. That's pretty amazing. We actually have another great question from the chat room already. Micro asks, does Chomper have a built-in Pomodoro type timer?
Yeah, so it does not. And the way I understand how a Pomodoro type timer works is that you designate that you want to work for 30 minutes and then have a 30-minute break. It would be pretty straightforward to implement that kind of feature. And if you're so interested, please go to GitHub and add that feature if you're interested in it. It's not something that I find I personally need. I have experimented with the Pomodoro type technique as well. But if that's something you're interested in, and if you wanted to work on it with me even, I'd be happy to implement that.
And let's talk about the technology then. So as I said in the opening of the show, it's in Python. So do you have to point your browser at it and use it as a proxy?
Yeah. So now I'm going to reveal the fact that I'm not a professional programmer. Everything I learned about computer networking, I learned in the process of developing Chomper. But the way I understand it is that there's different types of proxies, and one type of proxy, like a regular traditional proxy, will require you to point your browser directly to Chomper, whereas another type of proxy called a transparent proxy somehow works in a sense that any outgoing traffic, regardless of which particular browser it's coming from, will be captured by it. So Chomper uses a transparent proxy through a really nice Python library called MITM proxy, MITM proxy. So Chomper can essentially be seen as a wrapper around this proxy, and then a lot of configuration that's done to get it to work properly. But what you have to do, but which I've written an automated installation script for, is you have to add certificates generated by MITM proxy to get your browser to trust MITM proxy. So that's something that has to be done for each browser you work with. However, on, say, a Debian Linux distribution, the place where these certificates are stored is common for many browsers. And so I've been able to automate the process for a large set of browsers in installing this certificate. However, the certificate store can differ between different Linux distributions and certainly between operating systems. And so that's been a constraint in developing an automated installation script, which generalizes to many distributions and many operating systems.
Yeah, in fact, you just brought up an issue that I was going to ask you about, which is, and actually Jonathan Bennett, a frequent co-host of this show, in the chat room actually asked about, how do you handle SSL? Because at some point, your browser has to, if you're going to have a man-in-the-middle MITM situation, it has to trust a certificate being generated. It has to trust that SSL first, and then that reproxies out to the actual HTTPS. So is that process fairly straightforward?
To be honest, I'm not sure about the details of how that process works. It's something which is being abstracted away by this other library, which I'm using, MITM proxy.
Okay, and we also had another question in the chat room, which is this the kind of thing that a company could install on a site-wide basis and ensure that people aren't visiting Facebook during the day?
Yeah, I've thought a little bit about that, and I imagine you could if all of your traffic is being is going through some server or some host, and Chomper was installed on that server. It could. I'm not sure about the mechanics of how it would work, and that wasn't really the intention of it when I created it. But the intention was more noticing that there was a demand for this type of software, because I would see Stack Overflow questions and just random questions on the internet saying, does this kind of software exist for Linux? And the answer was no, or there are some really crappy substitutes, like just editing your own host file. So while this isn't really my intention with Chomper, I think it could be adapted to that purpose.
Cool. And so this is obviously sitting on my box, talking to the internet. Yeah. And the slowest part of that connection, of course, is always the internet. It's never me. Have you found that this has any impact on performance while you're trying to visit your whitelisted sites?
So, not to a great extent. I think that Mitim Proxy, which is the library that I use, is pretty well optimized, and so I haven't noticed any significant performance decreases. But then again, I don't really attempt to. I haven't fully stress tested it. So one thing that I noticed in testing was that when I was using Mitim Proxy and trying to open, say, 40 tabs at once, it would eventually break down. But that was due to a bug which the founder of Mitim Proxy and I worked on together and were able to fix. So I haven't noticed any significant performance decreases.
So I'm very interested by this because it seems to me that it requires all the same self-control to not just kill -9 it as it does to install it in the first place. So can't I just turn it off if I want to go browse the internet? And isn't it just a matter of my self-control?
That's a good question. So let me tell you how I actually use Chomper. So usually when people use their own desktop, they are always using a user with administrator privileges. I have intentionally removed my own administrator privileges. And what I do is I have a user, which I call Leroy, and this user has administrator privileges, and this user has a password, which I don't know, but I keep stuffed in my gym locker. So if I ever want to, if I ever want to install any program, if I ever want that's owned by root or do anything that requires root privileges, I have to ask Leroy to let me do that. And since my gym locker is very far away, I don't really want to have to go there. So it's an obstacle for me in preventing me from installing any new program that would circumvent Chomper. But then even just killing the process, the way I've sort of set it up is that I've created an entry in the installation in this sudoers.d directory, which is a directory which one of its functions is that it can allow you to define certain scripts which certain users can call as root in a very specific way. And so this is really critical for generating this kind of commitment nature of Chomper, because it allows me to allow a particular regular user to implement a block of websites, but it allows me to do it in a way such that they cannot also take away the block of websites. So if you want to use Chomper properly, you have to kind of introspect about whether you're willing to give up your administrative privileges. And it's true that for some people that won't be feasible. But I think that the set of people for whom it really is feasible is a lot bigger than you might think. Because most of the time you have a well-defined set of programs that you're using. You don't really need to be going around looking for new utilities or programs to use, sudo apt get all day. You have to do it in a very well-defined small set of circumstances. And I found that to be the case for me. And so this kind of mechanism has been more than sufficient for me to use Chomper properly.
Right. Then the other thing you mentioned was that it relies on whitelisting and blacklisting the domain names of sites that are distracting. That sounds complicated. I mean, it sounds like the research I have to do to find out what domain YouTube serves up video from is a complicated task. Would you say this is something that is straightforward to set up, or is it really a hobby to keep it set up and maintained?
So it took a little bit of experimentation for me to think about, given a particular task, what kind of things do I really need, and what kind of things do I not need. So, for example, in my research, sometimes I have to remember and look up certain Unix isms that I've forgotten. And so it was important for me to say whitelist unix.stackexchange.com in particular, along with Stack Overflow. But the broader question is, I guess, YouTube and Facebook could be serving up their content from a variety of URLs. And so it may be insufficient to merely block youtube.com and facebook.com. Actually, because I spend so much of my time working with whitelists, I haven't experimented with whether just blocking youtube.com in this specific case is enough to effectively use Chomper. So one thing which I've thought of doing and adding on is to have some kind of community-generated list, so that if you have a particular website you want to block, you would know exactly the domains you need on your, the URLs rather, or domains as well, that you need on your blacklist or whitelist to effectively implement this. And one of the things that's kind of been somewhat useful to this effect is there's this GitHub project, open source project, which is called, I don't know, it's like a common host file. It's by some guy named Stephen Black, I think. And it's intended for people who are like more concerned, say, about just blocking a set of advertisements on their host file, especially, say, the Facebook pixel, which is able to track your behavior across a different set of websites. And so I use that host file already on top of Chomper. And so I have like Facebook and Twitter and a lot of social media just blocked by default all the time. Like I can never access them, even when Chomper is off. But I agree that to block certain types of websites and to allow certain types of websites and certain types of functionality is not as trivial as just blocking the base domain.
Have you considered maybe training a Bayesian network to identify content that ought to be blocked rather than doing it by URL?
Yeah, I considered it and quickly rejected it because I just think it would be quite difficult. I'm familiar with the mathematics behind it because I come across a little bit of machine learning in my economics PhD, but it would be architecturally quite a large undertaking, and I think that would be so big that it would have to be more of a commercial offering or something on top of Chomper, and not something I'm looking to undertake right now.
Yeah. Perhaps you could tell some of our legislators that it's impossible to block by content, because they're thinking about putting it into law sometime soon, I'm told. So is this a Linux only activity that you've got here, or will it run anywhere that Python runs? And that's a question from Jonathan Bennett on the chat room.
Yeah, that's an important question. So it will feasibly run wherever Python runs, but right now it is pretty much Linux only. And the reason for that is one thing Chomper is doing is it's adding new rules to the Linux firewall to be able to forward all traffic to Mitim proxy, and is doing a little bit of other configuration, which is Linux specific. So right now, this automated installation script, which I've developed, is automating the installation of Chomper only for Debian-based distributions, which is where I started with because that's the highest market share, and that's what I have. I use Linux Mint. But it would be not trivial, but quite possible to extend Chomper to OS X, and that's something I've marked as an issue and a milestone on the project. But what I would have to change is the main thing I'd have to adjust is the firewall. So I think that OS X used to use IP tables, and then they moved to using a new type of firewall called the PF firewall. And so I actually, a month ago, bought a Mac Mini specifically to be able to experiment around with this. And it's something I'm going to get to. But if you're a listener out there and you're interested in Python and you like the idea of Chomper and want to see it implemented for OS X, reach out to me, and I'd be happy to work on it together.
You know, I actually was just astonished that you just said that about the, because I thought, at least for a long time, macOS had both IPFW and PF available. But I just typed just now, and yeah, it looks like IPFW is not there anymore. So that would make it a little more difficult to port that. So we've had a number of questions in the chat room, but I'm more curious now. How's your participation been on this? Have you gotten contributions from other people yet?
So it's a relatively new project. I sort of brought to maturity, say, 7 or 8 weeks ago, and then started talking to people on a few social media platforms like Reddit, Hacker News, and stuff about it. And it got a good reception there. I haven't had as easy a time finding contributors. I found some contributors. So there's somebody right now who's working on porting the installation script to Arch Linux. And there was somebody else who was trying to adapt it to the PF firewall. And I think he got his own hacked version working, but not something which you can distribute fully. So I've had a few contributors, not too many, but I think one of the reasons for that is initially when the project was released, I didn't do as good a job as I could have of outlining the code in a human way rather than just having somebody have to walk through the source code by themselves. And one thing I've done since is I've created good documentation, I think, and a developer's walkthrough. And additionally, coding can be lonely. So if you're interested in a particular feature, I would be really interested in working on it with you.
Cool. And as part of the discussion in the chat room, while I was not actually hosting for a second there, we came up with the idea of maybe something you've considered and haven't implemented yet, but to actually do content-based filtering. So it would look for certain keywords in the HTML that came back and block it based on that. Yeah.
So that's I think kind of similar to what Simon was just suggesting. I think that it would be quite possible, but doing it in a naive fashion is architecturally quite easy. So if you literally just want to block any page where Cialis and Viagra show up, then you can do that. That's quite easy. But if you want to make it useful and avoid having a lot of false positives, then that becomes, I think, architecturally a more difficult task, because I would either need to add a trained machine learning content model and have that packaged into Chomper, or I would need it to somehow be trained by the user, or I would need to have that trained model off on some server somewhere connected to Chomper, but then effectively having to deal with a lot of privacy issues where your web traffic is made available to the random server by some random grad student. And do you really want me to be able to see everything you're doing? I don't think so.
I know that wasn't very good for Facebook, so yeah. So, did you look at other things in this area and decided to reject them all and start with your own, or is this just more of an experiment in learning how to program?
No. I looked at the environment and I rejected them all. So there is no such option for Linux, and there is no such free and open source or just free and price option for OS X. So what does exist for OS X are some software which automate blocking on the host file, but and the most well-known of these, of the open source options, is a program called Self-Control. And I've talked to the developer of Self-Control, and they don't use a proxy. And because you're not using a proxy, you can't really effectively create blacklists and whitelists. So
right.
I think that there is really an opportunity for Chomper to sort of take that market share, because that project hasn't been actively developed in many, many years. And within Linux, again, there were just a couple of really old self-hacked host file-based solutions. And I think Chomper could be really useful to both the Linux and the OS X community. Windows is something that I don't really want to think about, because I started my programming career, or by programming career, I just mean, MATLAB development as a math major and a bit of Python hacking on Windows, and everything is harder. I don't want to think about that.
I totally agree. I mean, the day they require me to start using Windows is the day I go be a farmer or something. I'm just going to come out of the industry entirely. I'm just going to get out there. I did notice earlier when you talked about having to physically go across campus to go get your privileged password. I thought about that. Well, so you're getting exercise to be able to exercise your privilege. I thought that was sort of ironic.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be this physical thing, or this password is stored far away. There could be implementations which are local to your computer, which you could also imagine. But I think the key is that you have to set it up in a way such that there is a large cost, a large personal cost, such that internally, when you're doing the calculus, you realize that going on Reddit and then potentially going down this steep slope of internet surfing is more costly to you than this alternative.
And we actually speculated a little bit. Why the name Leroy?
Oh, I think it's a funny name. That's it. There's this video on YouTube that it's like an old video. It's this guy called Leroy Jenkins. And he
there you go. The chat room got it.
I nailed it. Yes, I did. Because I said, yes.
If you don't know, it's like, I think it was World of Warcraft, and the way World of Warcraft works is that there's like teams of people and clans who go and kill dragons or whatever. And so there's this funny video of a guy named Leroy who sort of deviates from the clan's plan and then goes and slays this dragon by himself, but in doing so just destroys his whole team's prospect. So it was pretty funny. I like that video.
but at least he got the chicken.
Yeah.
He had to leave to go get chicken and come back, and then he goes screaming. I think I've seen analysis.
Jenkins,
Yes, I think I've seen analysis though that even if they had gone according to the plan that they came up with, they still would have been slaughtered. So it really wasn't much different, but it's a lot more fun when he sort of blew the entire opportunity for the plan. So there are some that speculate that it was actually, I can't believe we're getting distracted by this, but hey, we got some time here.
You need some kind of a blocker, some kind of a blocker to stop you getting distracted. Have you considered that maybe?
How does that going to work? Well, earlier you were describing whitelisting, and you included Wikipedia in the whitelist. I can't imagine a bigger time sink than Wikipedia. So how would that ever work out?
I agree. One feature which I haven't implemented, but which I ought to. Well, Wikipedia would be hard because of its URL structure. What would be nice is if you could somehow limit Wikipedia's URLs by category. Because when I'm doing research, for example, if I do research on the economics of the media. So maybe I would need to be able to look up some details on the newspaper industry, which happen to be on Wikipedia. So this might be a situation in which this kind of content-based or text-based approach to blocking some websites based off their content could be useful. And I can imagine it being a situation where if I create some kind of plugin architecture for Chomper, such that people can add on like a method of just blocking Wikipedia based off categories, because you would need to scan the URL structure, but then you can sort of parse out the categories using the URL structure. But I think that before thinking about doing that, I would want to implement some of these more basic features.
So what's been the most unusual thing you've discovered writing the code for Chomper?
I mean, here's just an arbitrary unusual thing I discovered, which is that on Ubuntu, a cron job will not work if it's greater than 999 characters. That's a little fact which I found out.
What? There's a text limit in this day and age. There's actually a hard-coded limit in the length of a line. You've got to be kidding me.
And yeah, the reason I found that out is because I have to sort of deal with kind of unusual issues regarding the path variable here, because I sometimes need the root user to be able to access the regular user on whom this block is going to be implemented's path. And if that path is long, just due to redundancies or laziness, on Ubuntu, it happens to be the case that if you have more than 199 characters, it just won't work. So I haven't created a good solution to that in Chomper. It shouldn't affect most people, but I hack around with my path a lot, and so I had a lot of crap that I had to kind of get out of there.
I can't believe Vixie's cron. Well, maybe they're not using Vixie cron. Maybe they're using the old Linux cron or something. But Vixie's cron should be completely immune to path length and everything else like that, because that's the one that's used by most modern systems.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
That's weird. That is really, really weird. So, so your programming obviously has matured since you started this project. And I know you say you're not a professional programmer, but I'm a street trained programmer anyway, so I seem to be making a living doing this. So, you know, it's whatever you set your goals for, and keep a sense of that. Yep. What's on the roadmap? What are you still missing that you'd like people to help you with?
Yeah, so I think that there's two large features which I'd like to implement. The first I've discussed is this OS X adaptation, which would require me or perhaps somebody who knows about the PF firewall to figure out how to get this solution going. And also we would need to look into how certificate stores work on OS X relative to Linux. Then the small things which I want to keep doing are to continue automating installation for other Linux distributions. So this fellow who is working on the Arch Linux adaptation of the installation script has offered to turn it into an AUR package, which I guess is the package repository for Arch Linux. But then the big thing, that's not the two other big things which are necessary, I think, for kind of penetrating the more casual user market are one, to create a graphical user interface. And so I've done a little bit of research into what the options are there. And it just requires time away from my dissertation to implement that. And the other thing is I want to be able to package the Python interpreter along with any necessary packages, just all in kind of one executable file. And for that, there is this Python package which does that, called PyInstaller, I think. And so this would make Chomper a lot more accessible to people who don't want to use Git, who are unfamiliar with Python. And so ideally, you just have this simple program. You place it in like somewhere on your path, like user/local/bin, and then you just go off and start using it. That's kind of the final end goal. That's what I'd really like to have.
Do you have a sense of how many people have downloaded and started using Chomper on a regular basis?
Yeah. So like I keep looking back to the repository every now and then, because one nice thing that GitHub does is it allows project creators to look at analytics, and I can remember statistics exactly, but I know that it has 230 stars so far, and it seems like every week we get like 40 or so new cloners, and this is in a time when I haven't been developing Chomper as actively over the last few weeks as I was initially. So it's something which I think initially was getting a lot more unique cloners when I first put it on Reddit and in the weeks afterwards. So I think it's getting a healthy number of users.
So I'm fascinated that this is all in Python. It doesn't seem that that's a job requirement for you. Why did you pick Python to do this?
I picked Python to do it because it's a job requirement for my own research, and so it's what I know. Python's really useful for, say, developing scrapers, for parsing large data sets. It has a really nice packages to work with SQL, and there's this pandas open source kind of a data package that I use quite a lot in my own research, and so I already knew it, and I've always kind of inefficiently invested in learning about programming relative to what's useful for my research. So I like tinkering a lot, and so I knew quite a bit of Python coming in, and then I knew that Python was what I would likely want to use for creating Chomper. But what I didn't know anything about, like not a single thing, was how the internet actually works. So I had to learn that there's a distinction between HTTP and HTTPS, besides just what you see in your browser, this like little green tick or whatever that says this is a safe website. And then I had to learn about port forwarding. I sort of learned about kind of the model of how domain name resolution works. So that I just picked up on my own, but that was programming language agnostic. I knew I was going to use Python because it's what I knew.
So I've got a room full of Python geeks kind of sitting over there, and they want to take notes. They want to know what libraries you used that were useful. So could you give them hints as to what libraries they ought to be researching that you found were awesome for making this?
Yeah, the main one is really this one called Mitim proxy. And then besides that, I can just take a quick browse through the source code. But if I remember correctly, it's almost just a standard library besides Mitim proxy. So Mitim proxy is this great project led by two guys, one of which is, I think, a PhD student in Germany, Max Heels. So he's a really cool, friendly guy, very active on this project, and it's been used a lot for penetration testing and a lot of just kind of one application which this library has is kind of studying and noting what kind of outgoing traffic apps on Android are sending out, and it's been used, I think, to detect malicious behavior by apps. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, Mitim proxy is a really cool library to check out.
Right. And then when you were talking about configuring it, it sounded like it was a lot of text file editing involved in configuring it. Is there a GUI? Are you going to make one?
Yeah. So the right now, the way the configuration works is through a YAML file, YAML. I think that stands for something markup language. And so it's pretty straightforward. Like you have one level where you define a block rule, say like coding, and then underneath it you have another tag where you say it's a whitelist or blacklist, and then another one where you define the set of white sites that is contained in that whitelist or blacklist. And so if you go to the GitHub repository and the documentation, I have really nice examples of how this works. But you're correct. Some people may easily be turned off to having to configure things through a text file. And so that's one of the things which would definitely no longer be done manually and be done through some sort of GUI. But I've been working on 2 dimensions and thinking about creating a GUI. One is to research libraries, and I think I've settled on the library that I'm going to use because there's an array of different GUI libraries in Python. But then the other one is thinking about user interface and like how I want the thing to look. So right now I don't have specifics on how it would look, but I've been doing research on UI design and just reading a little bit about like the best way to create a form, the best way to create a software design in terms of how it looks. Because I think that's sometimes overlooked, going straight for function, and it would be nice to start with wireframes, work backwards. How would I want users to interact with this, and then implement that.
Right. So this sounds like you've done a great deal of research, a lot of programming and experimentation. A deep cynic in the chat room who has asked me not to mention his name asks, has Chomper saved you more time than it's taken you to develop? And then there's a more polite question, of course, which is, how has Chomper actually helped you with your work?
Yeah, so I wonder if that deep cynic is one of my grad school friends, because I told 2 of them about this, and they're very likely to be trolling me on there, but maybe they're not. It's helped because some of the stuff I do is deeply boring. It's in my dissertation, I have to do an array of work. Some of it is relatively interesting. That's usually the coding component. Sometimes the coding can get boring, and sometimes I have to manage freelancers who are doing manual data entry for me, write scripts that verify if their data entry is done correctly, but then check their errors. And that bit is just mind-numbingly boring. And hopefully one day I'll have a research assistant who I can sort of delegate these boring tasks off to. But when you have to do it to the volume that I have in my dissertation research, it gets overwhelming. And so having this application to kind of focus in has been very helpful. And the other question was, has it saved you more time than it took to create it? And the jury's still out on that one, because I spent a lot of time making it. And that was mostly because I was learning about what would be necessary for creating Chomper in a very undirected way without having anybody else to talk to about what I was learning. It was mostly just, reading a book here and there, going on Stack Overflow. Oh, there's this difference between IPv4 and IPv6. Okay, we'll have to handle those things differently, and just kind of picking it up piecemeal. So if there's anyone out there who's interested in this and you wanted to work together, I bet that we could speed it up. And I think it'd be a lot of fun to work on.
So what do you think is going to happen first, finishing your PhD or breaking even on Chomper?
I really, really hope breaking even on Chomper, but we'll see.
And speaking of that, what is your research about? You might as well tell us. We've got a few more minutes. So.
Yeah, sure. So I work on generally media economics is my research area. And what I'm studying is how consolidation in the American newspaper industry affects news content. So what we're seeing today is a wave of very large media mergers. So you may have noticed this company, Sinclair Broadcasting. Yeah. They're trying to acquire a Tribune company, and the result of this merger will be that 75% of local TV news stations will be owned by Sinclair Broadcasting. And I think people on the internet were quite upset about this. And one evidence of this is if you go on Reddit right now, go to videos and look at the all-time highest ranked video, you find this video of synced Sinclair Broadcasting broadcasts all saying the same exact thing in synchrony. So what I'm looking at is a similar episode of consolidation in media, but looking at the time period between 1950 and 1980. So what occurred was that it used to be that most newspapers were owned by independent families local to the area where the newspapers published. And now most newspapers are part of corporate chains, which are these companies owning several newspapers. So I study how these transitions affect news content by creating measures of content directly from the text of newspapers that are kept in newspaper databases like newspapers.com and newspaperarchive.com. And so what I find is that what these newspapers are doing when they transition to chain ownership is they're reducing the amount of local content and then increasing the amount of cheap, national and international content.
Wow, that's a real fascinating research project. Sounds like a lot of fun. And just before we go, we're getting close to getting to the end of the show here. You mentioned something about the Center for Humane Technology. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's something I came across while I was, starting to think about Chomper generally. It seems to be this initiative created by, I have no affiliation with them. I just think it's a little bit cool. It's this initiative created by a former Facebook employee who was kind of noticing that, these technology has become a lot more potentially addictive than it was in the past. And these addictions can have deep ramifications for the way in which we interact with each other and perhaps even the way in which our brain works. So it's this center which is kind of trying to get tech companies, or perhaps through regulation, to have them be a little bit more ethical, where ethical is, again, a vague word, in how they create technology. So it may be that trying to persuade companies of their own volition to make things less addictive and more useful. So I think it's a little bit aligned with what I'm doing here. That's all.
I've said for many years now that I spend more and more time online every day, and I don't think it has improved any of my quality of life. I think, if anything, it's had a very strong descending effect on my quality of life. So I can completely see that. But I'm also a social media butterfly, so I spend a lot of time on Facebook, Twitter. I post things regularly to Google Plus and everything like that. But what's great about that is that I've gotten to meet so many cool people all around the world, because my world travels taken me to 61 countries so far, and it's a great way to connect up with people and hook up with that. So I guess in some sense, yes, my quality of life has increased in pockets, but not overall. Right. I think that overall it does. So like I said, we're almost out of time. Is there anything we didn't ask that you want to make sure our audience is aware of before we have to let you go?
No. I think we pretty much covered everything. Cool. Thanks for having me on. And if you're interested in Chomper, check out the GitHub repository, or reach out to me just directly. You can reach me at Aniket, ANIKET, at addicted2.tech.
Which my mailer kept saying that can't be a real domain. So it's like, no, yes, override it. It's a real domain. Come on, catch up with the times. Poor GNUs. And I have two mandatory questions I have to ask. And I think I know the answer to one of them. What's your favorite scripting language?
Oh, well, we know that one. Python 3.
Python. And what do you spend? What text editor do you use all day?
I use Spacemacs, which is both Emacs and Vim. It has Vim key bindings for all Emacs packages, or a large set of them within Emacs. So that's what I use.
Well, I think that's the first time anybody's ever said that. No, maybe like a few years ago, also same thing. But at least I love the Emacs part of that, because I'm an Emacs user, heavy Emacs user myself. So, although lately it's been Visual Studio Code as I'm coding in Dart and Flutter, so it's been I've been actually changing to an actual IDE finally. Although wait, Emacs is IDE, right. So, Aniket, thank you for coming on and talking to us about Chomper. I had to look over at the list for a second there. Yeah, Chomper, that's what it is. That's what we're talking about. And I hope you get a lot of new followers, a lot of new coding help, and get things to go.
I hope so. Thanks for having me.
That was great. That was Aniket Panjwani talking to us about Chomper. What do you think there, Simon?
I think it's something that is very much a personal choice. I think that I would be very hard-pressed to bring myself to first install it and then keep it maintained so that it added more benefit than it was consuming time. It seems to me like it's solving the problem of distraction by creating a distraction which is inside the room rather than outside the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems a little bit like that, because that's probably why I listen to podcasts while I'm busy doing the rest of my work, because I need that little bit of distraction to keep me so I can stay focused on my work, which is really strange, but maybe I'm just weird. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'd be interested, as we've got a room full of Python geeks, we've also been joined by Josh Simmons from Google at the back there. I'd be interested to hear whether they've got any comments about it as a Python project. Anyone got a comment that they've... Just speak up. Yeah.
All right. Have you ever considered...
Yeah, you're over there.
Okay.
And not so much a question as a comment, because the guest can't answer.
A comment, no.
No.
Well, actually, I have one. It's not regarding Python. Can I say name of products?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, right. I'm using Rescue Time a lot, which is doing some of the stuff that's you described, mostly on the blocking part. Something that I recommend you working on if you want to do a web part is tracking where you spend time. If it's something that is something that you can mix with the product, because it helps you understand what are the worst thing you do online and then for how much time. And in my opinion, it helped me a lot understanding how I spend time on the internet.
Right. Josh?
I think the guy deserves kudos for like taking on a serious project and open sourcing it as a learning exercise, even if it doesn't actually help him save time. It's kind of
yeah. You know, I think that's the big deal. I think he's made a personal tool there, and he's made it open source, and he's taught himself to program, and he's encouraged other people to join in. I was just looking at his GitHub page, and on the GitHub page there's a welcome to Floss Weekly, encouraging people to join in with his project and contribute to it. And I think that, you know, more power to him that he's written a personal tool, he's made it open source, and that's how things start. You know, that's where Asterisk came from, was from some guy writing the thing he needed, teaching himself to program it, and making it open source. And this is the power of open source. It's you write your thing, you make it available, and if anybody else cares about it, they'll join in with you because they can. I think that's really important.
Cool. Okay, well, let's speaking of Python, by the way, next week we have PyPy, which is the package manager for Python, which will be on. So I'm sure all your audience right there is going to be pretty happy about that. Following that is Ssl, which is the grassroots technological conference dedicated to spreading awareness and knowledge about the GNU Linux community and free Libre open source software and hardware. That's actually a free conference in Seattle, Washington, November 9th and 10th in 2018, which is in fact... I'm definitely planning on attending it. It's now on my calendar, so that'll be kind of fun. The Lounge, which is a self-hosted IRC client. It's a fork of Shout. Hubble Stack, which is a modular open source security compliance framework. React PHP is a low-level library for event-driven programming in PHP. Just added to the schedule between last week and this week is RB Spy. RB Spy lets you profile Ruby processes that are already running. You give it a PID and it starts profiling it. It's a sampling profiler, which means it's low overhead and safe to run in production. I'm looking forward to that one. Not that I'm doing a lot in Ruby, but it's always nice to hear about technologies like this. Wrapping up our currently planned schedules, Keycloak, which is an open source identity and access management for modern applications and services. Are you familiar with Keycloak, Simon?
No, it's not something I've run into.
Wow, because you did identity management for a while, so
yeah, that was long back in my past, the identity management, and they decided to go proprietary, so I lost track of them a little while back.
Ah, okay. Well, Keycloak is coming up for that. You can go to the big spreadsheet for this show at twit.tv/floss. And if you have any other suggestions, please have the project leader or community coordinator email me, merlin@stonehenge.com. My address is on there. You don't have to write it down here. We have a live stream. We took a number of questions from there today at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv. You can join the audience and ask your own questions and get your own laughs sometimes. You can follow us at Floss Weekly on Google Plus and at Floss Weekly on Twitter. Please don't block those with today's project if you want to go to those things. You can follow me at Randall L. Schwartz on Google+, and that also tweets over to @Merlin, MERLYN on Twitter. I am going to be at the Red Hat Summit in San Francisco coming up in just a couple weeks. We are planning a meetup. I think it's on May 7th, something like that, whatever that Monday is right there. So it'll be downtown San Francisco. I'll give you more details as we get it more settled down. Probably be at the hotel lobby, where at the hotel I'm staying at. I'm also going to be at the Pro Conference in Salt Lake City in June, which will be a lot of fun. I've already got some plans for what I want to talk about there. Anything you want to plug, Simon?
Yes, so I'm just going to miss you for the Red Hat Summit because I'm in San Francisco until the weekend that you arrive. We've got an OSI board meeting next week. If you are in the San Francisco Bay Area and you would like us to buy you drinks, then if you write to any director, we will try and work out how to do that. I will be speaking at OW2Con in Paris on the 7th and 8th of June, and I'll be speaking, giving the keynote at EclipseCon Europe in Toulouse in France, the 12th to the 14th of June. there is a passing chance that I will be at OSCON in Portland, which is July 16th to 19th. And then there's other stuff coming up. If you want to track what I'm up to, visit my company website, meshedinsights.com, or look for me as Webmink, WEBMINK, on Twitter and pretty much everywhere else. And I would also welcome supporters on Patreon, patreon.com/webmink. Please sign up and help me to do this sort of stuff instead of having to go find somebody else to work for who wouldn't want me to do this sort of stuff.
Well, Simon, thank you for hosting today's show and coming all the way into the studio for that. And thank you also to your guests that you brought along with you.
Yep, there they are. Thank you very much for coming, guys. Thank you for being so patient and quiet over there.
Cool.
Oh.
Yay! We did a show. That's a show. We're going to wrap it up right now, and we'll see you all again next week on Floss Weekly.